Welcome to Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Shadow Man Remastered. I played on the Xbox Series X via backwards compatibility. It's basically available on everything else. It was originally released on the PS1, N64, and Dreamcast. So you play as the Shadow Man, and his partner slash lover, I don't know, Nettie, is having these weird apocalyptic dreams. And only you, the Shadow Man, can stop them. Which, those dreams are basically there's an evil dude putting together more evil dudes, so that he can harvest dark souls and use them to bring about the apocalypse, essentially. So the story is totally okay, it pushes you along. I think some of the characters are pretty cool, but I gotta say overall, I feel like the story is just a little bit too drip-fed to you, and that's partly a gameplay element, but it's functional enough. Let's get into the audio, and the first thing I'm gonna say is the soundtrack. I think it's excellent. I wouldn't say it's exactly spooky or anything, but it definitely fits with you going to a place called the Dead Side. As for the voiceover work, it's not amazing. Some of the accents are kind of shit, and the deliveries could be better. I mean, it's far from the worst I've ever heard, but, you know. Then you've got the sound effects. I mean, this was a PS1 era game. The audio has clearly been cleaned up, but it's still very limited, and it's still not mind-blowing. Let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. This is a third-person adventure shooter game, and I kind of mentioned how the gameplay negatively impacts the story, and that is because you get the idea of what you're supposed to do, but there's just so much tracking down these Dark Souls and these other items to really get the story moving. It's honestly my biggest complaint with this game is you spend a lot of time wandering around trying to collect these things. Specifically, I think they're called the Dark Souls. Or now I'm suddenly questioning myself if it's Dark Seeds. Either way, you have to gather these so that you can open doors, so that you can find other items, so that you can use your Shadow Man powers while in live side, not just in dead side. And every time you feel like you might be moving forward in the story, the gameplay kind of holds you back by being, oh, you need more of these. And if this is the only game you're going to be playing for a while, then that's fine. But if you're trying to move along, it's going to really slow things down for you. I personally think this game could benefit better from being a much more linear game. It's not open world, but you can really do a lot of exploration, and you can find yourself in areas that you really don't need to be in yet. And while there is a map, it's a truly, truly shitty map, so that doesn't help you along, and finding some of these things just requires way too much wandering about. Now that being said, the things I do enjoy are, I think the shooting actually works far better than I was expecting. This game has kind of like an auto lock on. You just kind of point your camera in the general direction, and he will shoot at the nearest enemy. When it comes to the items that you are stumbling about to find, they have a variety of effects. Some of them are keys, some of them are actual weapons, and the weapons do feel different, which I appreciate. Like, my preferred one was this one that shot these little homing missiles. Didn't do a huge amount of damage, but they fired rapid and they hit everything they basically tried to hit. But then you get things that shoot fire, things that shoot explosions, etc. So I appreciate that. One thing that is a little weird and hard to get used to is there are certain items where you have to equip them to actually use them as keys. So that's a little weird and different. You don't see that often. It works well enough, it's just, like I said, a little weird and different. And also kind of weird and unique in a less positive way is you can dual wield, which that's fine. But when you're trying to climb on ledges and shit, you have to unequip your weapons manually. It's weird because normally that just kind of happens automatically. I mean, it makes perfect sense. You're not gonna be able to, like, climb up this ledge with a gun in one hand and some mystical voodoo stick in another. But it would be nice if it was automatic rather than manual. I definitely screwed myself over on some platforming stuff forgetting to unequip my weapons. It is easy enough, though. You just hit the Y button, they're both unequipped, and you can continue climbing. Like I said, weird and unique to this game. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot of exploration in this game, and I guess I could kind of call this a bit of a Metroidvania because you go and find new abilities and you go and backtrack and find more Dark Souls, find more items that you need to progress. So I think that benefits the longevity of the game. I just wish they did a better job, like, giving you story throughout rather than, hey, collect all this shit, then story. But really, the gameplay does feel very limited by when it originally came out. Now let's get into the controls, and the first thing I'm going to say is they took a minute to get used to. The camera feels a bit loose at times. You do get used to making smaller adjustments so that your character's not swinging crazy wide, specifically when it comes to the camera and whatnot. The one weird thing I did have is, yes, I play inverted for my vertical, but it said that was on, but I had to turn it off for it to actually be inverted, so that was a weird thing. Otherwise, I think the controls worked well. I don't have any major complaints. Like I said, they take a little getting used to. Now let's get into the graphics and visuals, and the first thing I'm going to say is I had to change my brightness settings eventually. I tried to keep everything as stock as possible, but there was shit I just couldn't see, so I couldn't really go where I needed to go. I had to crank up the brightness quite a bit. And I'm going to address one of my favorite things in this game is that I mentioned the auto aim. He really moves his arm around to actually aim at things, so that was cool, and I appreciate that from such an old game. But not only that, like when I was looking at traps, there was like a giant swinging hammer. His head would track that, and I thought that was a neat little addition to the game. Because in reality, there's modern games where you don't even see stuff like that, or where their arm isn't really moving to track where they're shooting. So putting that in there is kind of impressive considering how old this game is. Now, saying that, I mean, it looks old as shit. Calling this a remaster is bullshit in my opinion. This is an HD re-release. They cleaned up the lines, they cleaned up the audio, but visually, this looks straight off the PS1 and 64. I mean, it's just cleaner lines so you don't see every single pixel, which don't get me wrong, that is nice, that is very appreciated. But I expect a bit more from something that's being called a remaster. Now, having complained about that, I will say I think the character design is really well done. I think Shadow Man's like live side, dead side looks are pretty damn cool. I think the creature designs are well done. I definitely like the levels. They all really fit with the vibe that they're going for whatever they're going for, whether you're live side or not. Visually, everything's probably a bit stereotypical. Some of it definitely fits that 90s edgelord vibe a bit, but I think it actually kind of works in a fun way. And once you crank up the brightness, it's actually a pretty colorful game. You may not notice that at first, but I did actually really appreciate that. It helps you see all the different designs, whether it's creature or world, and they clearly put some effort into making it unique. So to wrap this up, I've got to say that this is a game you've got to be willing to get into the right mindset for. You've got to be in the mindset of, I'm going to have to run around and collect a bunch of stuff in order to progress. Not just for the shits and gigs of it. You literally can't progress without it. Which I think kind of works to the detriment of this game, but at the same time, like, if you're in the right mood for it, I can totally see wanting to play this game. So at the end of the day, it's kind of hard to recommend, because if you're like me and you're playing a new game every week, this game really kind of drags that down. But if this is the only game you're going to play for a while, I can totally see enjoying this, or if you're totally willing to go back to it, I could see enjoying this. And overall, while it's rough around the edges because it comes from a bygone era, I can say there's fun to be had here, maybe not for everyone though. Okay, so in the comments down below, since this did come out on the Dreamcast at one point, why don't you tell me if you owned a Dreamcast, because I did. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button, and if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.